listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking with Chen, who's an associate professor of economics at the Yale School of Management. He specializes in behavioral economics, which is a favorite topic of mine. He's covered a great deal of diverse topics from economics to psychology and biology. In fact, he's looked at how ex-prisoners would have looked different if their conditions in prison would have been different. He's looked at monkeys. In fact, I'm not sure if that's the students or actual monkeys. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit. But we're real happy to have Professor Chen on the show. Keith, pleasure.
Hi, it's great to be here.
I want to touch base on something which is some of, I think, your newer research, which is related to language. You've spoken about how some languages have a concept of the future and some don't. What's that all about?
Yeah, so as a behavioral economist, one of the things that I kind of work on most and study is how people make decisions when those decisions involve kind of critically aspects of time. So how do you kind of like muster the will to save for retirement? How do you muster the will to wake up early in the morning and exercise, right? How do you kind of muster the will to quit smoking, right? So, and all of these decisions basically kind of involve that they all feel like savings to an economist, and that's because they all fundamentally involve this idea that you have to kind of endure some kind of present and pain in the present in order to gain pleasure and kind of benefits in the future.
Okay, so how does that relate then to the language that people use?
Yeah, so the interesting thing that I started to notice was that when you look across countries, okay, in the world, first of all, there's vastly different savings rates. I mean, there's vastly different kind of tendencies of people to be able to kind of sacrifice in the present in exchange for the future. And there's a lot of different factors going on. I mean, there's obviously strong cultural factors. There's kind of, experiences with kind of depression and hyperinflation and all those kinds of things. But a factor that stood out to me that economists had not thought a lot about was differences in how your language forces you to talk about the future. I was talking with some kind of colleagues who are linguists, and I was kind of reading up on some of the interesting work that they do. And I realized that in fact, actually, about kind of 10% of world languages, interestingly enough, have no kind of systematic future tense, or in some sense, it's a minority of languages in the world, but there are some very notable examples like Chinese and Finnish and kind of languages like that, that basically force their speakers to talk about the future as if it were the present, kind of speak about the future in exactly the same way that they talk about the present. And the interesting thing is that, like, even though many of these languages are outliers in the world in terms of how they talk about the future, almost all of those countries are also outliers in terms of how much they save. They save tremendous amounts. And what I began to wonder was, if your language kind of treats the future exactly the same way that it treats the present, does that make the future feel more like the present? And does that make it easier to save?
So the theory is that if a language does not have a concept or a future tense, that people are always thinking that the future is now, and therefore it's easier for them to save because they're basically putting aside money that they're going to use right now in the same way that, for example, an American might put aside money or borrow money to go buy something which he can't afford.
That's exactly right. So in some sense, when you're saving, your present self has to feel pain, and your future self gets to bear the fruit, see the rewards of that. And in some sense, if your future self feels more like your present self, if in fact you kind of talk about these two people in the same way, then that should make that kind of activity easier.
Okay, so this sounds like a very useful lesson for those of us who, I have some friends who are Chinese, and when they talk, I simply, not only can I not understand anything, but I can't even sense that there is a difference in the words. So I'm afraid I won't be able to learn Chinese in the near term. Hebrew's hard enough. What can people do to adapt this way of thinking within their own language?
Well, since I've started this project, it's actually kind of interesting. If you look at kind of both financial advice, but also kind of personal goal advice. I mean, I'm not advocating this. I'm not kind of saying you should go out and do this, but many people who kind of do give advice about how people should be able to set goals that they can follow through on actually advocate writing down a list of goals and writing them down in the present tense. They say that this is kind of a more effective way of kind of visualizing yourself kind of achieving these things. Actually, there's something interesting. There are aspects, there are kind of examples of this in Hebrew as well, but you actually see oftentimes people trying to shift their own or listeners' perceptions of time by kind of systematically and subtly kind of like changing tenses. So for example, like oftentimes linguists call this the historical present. Oftentimes when you hear people talking about past events, if they want to make them feel more present or feel more vivid, they'll talk about them in the present tense. So you'll hear someone recounting a story, say like, oh, so I see my friend walking down the street, and I say to him, and obviously you're not indicating that that's happening right now.
We're talking with Keith Chen, who's an associate professor of economics at Yale. He talks a lot about behavioral finance and behavioral economics, but not really necessarily the economics, but more about the interesting behaviors of human beings. We've been talking about how people think about the future in terms of the language that they have. Keith, I'd like to ask you something about how people can visualize the future, because as a financial planner, I'm constantly trying to find ways of showing people that they need to think about the future. Language is one way. Are there other ways that people can really bring it closer to home?
Definitely. The kind of main takeaway from a lot of my research is that people whose languages kind of subtly encourage them to disassociate the future from the present have a very difficult time savings. But there's many ways that people in their own lives can try and emphasize to themselves that they're not kind of toiling for no good reason. Like this all has kind of future rewards and future payoffs. Actually, one really interesting way to see this, a kind of colleague of mine at the University of Pennsylvania ran this fascinating study where he got a company to agree to send kind of digital photos from the kind of the company directory to him. And then he just applied some very, very kind of standard now software where you kind of like digitally age people's photos. So you basically take these smiling photos, kind of headshots of people, and digitally age them, to look like they're 65. All right. And then what he had the company do was randomly on half of their employees' kind of retirement forms, put a smiling picture of you at age 65 on the form that asks you, how much would you like to put away for retirement? And
To
on
help
the other
that
half,
guy, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And on the other half of forms, that just put a standard picture, just the smiling picture of you unaltered to see what the effect was. And what he found was these pictures of a 65-year-old you dramatically increase people's willingness to kind of, put aside large shares of their kind of current wages into their retirement accounts, whereas pictures of just the smiling them don't. So, I mean, I think that the lesson here is, a habit of mind that encourages you to remember that, the retired you is you, right? And that you really care about that person can go a long way to helping you overcome kind of problems with savings.
That's a fascinating study. I'm trying to imagine how I could do that. I could prepare a financial plan for someone, and as we get to the chart later in life, I could put up pictures of how they'll look and see if that affects, if they'll, one of the hardest things I find, it's very funny, is if someone, let's say, earns $5,000 a month, he spends just about that. And the same person in the same family structure who earns $10,000 a month spends it all. And when I tell them, you've got to save a little bit, no one thinks it's possible. Everyone I speak to thinks that, well, I live a very modest lifestyle. So I think people don't necessarily picture themselves quite the right way.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, I think that's probably why you see a lot of financial planners try and systematically talk with people about their future plans, right? Kind of make very visceral and real what you want to be doing, kind of 10, 20, 30 years from now.
Right.
And kind of, if you can make that very, very real, then that makes it a lot easier to sacrifice.
I should look and see if my clients who are Hebrew speakers are different from my clients who are English speakers natively, because presumably people speak in their own language.
Yeah, interesting. Yes.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. Can you just tell us what are some other aspects of this research that we can look forward to?
So, directions that I'm taking this research now, and I actually think they may be more exciting than some of the kind of effects that I'm finding on savings. It turns out these language effects are also very, very big on other dimensions. So, we're looking at kind of ability to quit smoking. I actually have some new projects that are looking at kind of safe sex behavior, even in a developing country kind of setting. All of those things. More broadly, though, where this research really is heading right now is in the direction of just really trying to help tease out those kind of subtle drivers of our own savings behavior. And hopefully in the future, once we really, really understand, all of the ways that and all of the subtle influences that kind of impact how people make these decisions, we're hopefully going to be able to use that research to help make people better stewards of their own futures.
That sounds like it will be incredibly useful, very, very interesting. We'd like to keep track of that. Keith, in the last couple of seconds, just tell me, how can people follow your work?
Oh, well, you can always just find my website at Yale. If you just Google Keith Chen, I'm usually the first link, or Keith Chen Economist, or Keith Chen Yale, and come check out the work.
Okay, looking forward. Thanks so much for your time.
All right, thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.